finding the distance between 2 points. To find the distance between 2 points, we use the distance formula. The distance formula looks rather complicated, but it's really not very complicated. In order to find the distance, we have to know 2 points. I'm going to call the first point whichever one is listed first. The little subscripts in our formula indicate which point we're talking about. So where you see the x with a little 2 beside it and the x with a little 1 beside it, this means the x from the second point, and this means the x from the first point. So I'm going to call this my first point and this my second point. The distance between those points is the square root of x from the second point minus the x from the first point, quantity squared, plus the y from the second point minus the y from the first point, quantity squared. After we add those together, we take the square root. So let's look at a problem and find the distance between these points. First, let's look at where these points are. If we've got the point 3, negative 6, if we graph that, here's 3, here's negative 6. So that point is going to be right here. The point negative 4, 5 is going to be right here. So when we calculate the distance between these points, we're really figuring the distance of that straight line. My line's not very straight, but we're figuring how long that line is. So let's go on to the formula. I'm going to refer to the point 3, negative 6 as my first point, and the negative 4, 5 as my second point. So that means my second x is the negative 4, and the first x is the positive 3. So that tells me my distance is going to equal the square root. All this stuff goes under the square root symbol. Negative 4 minus a 3. Because the formula has subtraction in it, be real careful with your signs. Then outside the parentheses, we put our squared. Plus, now we want to do the same thing with the y's. If this is the first point, and this is the second point, my second y is the 5, and my first y is the negative 6. So I have 5 minus a negative 6 squared. So now I've got to do the work that's in there. I want to start with what's inside each parentheses. So the negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7. So I have a negative 7 squared. And the 5 minus a negative 6 is 11. Because remember, 5 minus a negative 6 means 5 plus 6. So I have a negative squared plus a 7 squared, all under the square root symbol. So now let me square those numbers. The negative 7 squared means negative 7 times negative 7. So that's 49. 11 squared is 11 times 11, so that's 121. So the square root of 49 plus 121 is 170. So under the radical, I have 170. So this means the square root of 170. The square root of 170 is what we call an exact value. Because the 170 is not a perfect square, when we go to our calculator to find the value for the square root of 170, it's going to give us a non-ending decimal value. So when we want to give the exact value for an answer, we give the radical form. That means with the square root in there. Sometimes we will want to give an approximate answer. If we want to give an approximate answer, we're not going to need our calculator. Let's say we want to approximate this to the nearest thousandth. Now I need to go to my calculator. Now I want to make it bigger because I know you can't see that very well. So let me make this bigger on my screen here. And I'll turn the calculator on and then do the square root. The square root is right here. So I want to do second square root. Okay, let me do it now. Second square root of 170, close the parentheses after the 170, is 13.0384. Now if I want to go to the nearest thousandth, if I look right here, this is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths place. The thousandths place is the third place behind the decimal point. So the digit right after that is a 4. That tells me I do not need to round that up. So I would approximate this value to 13.038. So that would be an approximate answer, and the square root of 170 would be the exact answer.